Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, folks, back to Dominant Mets Nation. Thank you all for returning. Before we get started, if you could click that like button, I gladly appreciate it. And throughout the course of this video, I'd love for you to subscribe. If you're not yet subscribed, join the Dominant Mets Nation family. I greatly appreciate it. And again, we love you to join the family. All right, folks. Big question of the day, question of the year, question we will probably see answered very, very soon. And is David Stearns going to learn from past mistakes? Big question, big question. Now, the thing is, in 2025, it's very easy to determine many mistakes were made. The New York Mets finishing 83-79, a very disappointing year for a team that built and took many steps and made strides in 2024, finishing 2 games shy of the World Series and looking very promising, signing Juan Soto and getting ace starter back CODY BELLINGER, plus a bevy of other moves that was supposed to improve our depth. Did it happen? Not really. Not really. Our kind of core of what David Stearns wants to preach collapsed. And that was our pitching. Our pitching was horrid. Our defense, our fundamentals was horrid. But again, you can't really look at the outcome and criticize the outcome. You kind of got to look at what was the approach. What was the mindset in 2025, the beginning of 2025? And again, that is what you have to fix. Now, one of the biggest questions going into last year's offseason was, are you going to get an ace? A lot of questions going into last offseason because you had CODY BELLINGER pitching only 5 innings in 2024. You had Sean Manaea. Yes, he had a good couple months, but you know what? He was a free agent. Are you going to sign him, number one? And number two, was that sustainable? Was that the real Sean Manaea? All right, the Mets bet on that was the real Sean Manaea. Other questions, you needed depth. You signed Frankie Montas. A lot of people knew what that would entail, and it apparently didn't entail too much positive. We saw where that resulted in. And then you were relying on a lot of projects like Clay Holmes. You were relying on David Peterson to go to a different place that he's ever been, beyond 121 innings. And you were asking just too many question marks. So again, what are we going to do in terms of approach? Now, approach, you eliminate question marks. Number one folly of the 2025 offseason last year, you had an opportunity to really just, hit things hard, hit the ground running, and Garrett Crochet was available right off the bat. Now, apparently the Mets and the White Sox spoke, and they spoke a lot about that trade. But it just seems like Boston, their philosophy and their approach was ultra aggressive as well. And they had a better farm system at the time. So their package superseded the Mets package. And number two, the Mets weren't willing to dip their toe in as much as the Red Sox, meaning they weren't willing to put Sproat and Jet Williams together to acquire this ace in Garrett Crochet. Weren't willing to do it. And I remember reading the articles, Garrett Crochet, Jet Williams, and another player. That was basically what the White Sox wanted. Now, fast forward to this season, it looks like the Mets are going to have to put some version of that package together anyways to acquire a frontline starter. TYREK SKUBAL is the man that we've been hearing all over the place. That's the package that everybody's predicting the Mets are going to go very heavy and aggressive for. You've seen insiders from John Heyman to other insiders reporting, Andy Martino, that the Mets are going to make an aggressive push for an ace. And TYREK SKUBAL, being in his last year of the contract, it looks like that's going to be the guy. But, in terms of package, it looks like it's going to be that similar package that the Mets bypassed on last year. But the thing is, now, instead of, building around those two guys, it looks like you're going to have to do that. Plus give more. People are saying you're going to have to give Jet Williams. You're going to have to give Jonah Tong, Brandon Sproat, then 2 other top 15 prospects. So the prospect package is still going to be quite high. And if you want to keep them long term, that $400 million price tag is around what you are hearing that you're going to have to pay. And Scott Boras is his agent. So we know Mr. Scott Boras loves those historic paydays, and that's what he's looking for. He's looking for that pitcher to touch that $400 million threshold. All right. So again, I think that it is one of the advantages to the New York Mets, because I don't think that a lot of teams are going to be, maybe teams will be capable, but are they willing to go to that $400 million? So let's just say there's 5 teams out there willing to go to $400 million. All right, out of those 5 teams, are those 5 teams willing to give up the trade package necessary? So maybe there's 5 teams. Now you eliminate, okay, there's maybe 3 teams willing to give up the trade package and able and willing to sign him to a $400 million contract. So again, when you eliminate teams, when you eliminate possible destinations for Detroit to trade Skubal to, now, that kind of keeps the price to, I don't want to say reasonable, but something that the Mets are willing to consider. And that is why when I hear Paul Skeens, Hunter Green, guys who have many more years left, it just seems like I don't think the Mets would dip their toe in, because I think the only thing that the Mets kind of are okay with is that he's got 1 year left. We don't mind giving the money because we have money, but the fact that he only has 1 year left, that's keeping the price tag kind of okay, even though it's still very high, but okay enough where the Mets would be willing to dole out those prospects to acquire. We're talking about acquiring a guy who is a top of MLB level pitcher and a Cy Young candidate. So again, lesson number 1, are the Mets going to be willing to take the risk, just like they weren't willing to take the risk last year to acquire that front line starter, Garrett Crochet? I'm telling you, Garrett Crochet, it's quite obvious, quite evident. If they had Garrett Crochet, they would have made the playoffs. They would have made the playoffs. And, again, you can, I've said this so many times. You could point to X, Y, Z. You could point to so many factors because the Mets missed the playoffs by 1 game. And with this expanded playoff format, it should be easy for a team with this talent and these resources to make the playoffs. You have to fail on so many different areas to miss it. So again, number 1, learning from past mistakes. Are you going to take the risk to acquire the ace? The ace. Okay. Now, here are some other points, and we're going to get to center field is very important to me. That is very, 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 very important to me. Another position that is important to me is the leadership on this team. The leadership on this team, and I think we didn't take that into consideration in 2025, in the beginning of 2025. We had an opportunity to continue to build on the team, the chemistry, the clubhouse from the prior year. The clubhouse that's had so much energy, so much life, so much enthusiasm. We had a chance to build on that. And it was quite obvious that Jose Iglesias had a large part to do with that. Now, I know his numbers were great in terms of 337 batting average. That wasn't going to be replicated. It wasn't. But that leadership quality, the fact that he was able to bring guys together, and, there is something to it. Guys like Carlos Mendoza, especially young managers, that was something that also wasn't taken into the equation. You want to put as much support around Carlos Mendoza as possible while he was still in these beginning stages of being a manager. So I felt that a guy like Jose Iglesias, who was essentially like a coach on the field and a guy who could bring the guys together, that was such an effective thing to build around. It wouldn't have cost you a lot of money. And at the end of the day, if it didn't work out, you could do what you did with many players. You could release him. You could do a plethora of different options, but the Mets decided not to go down that road. Now, the Mets have an opportunity to get a guy who, I'm not saying is Jose Iglesias, but Starling Marte is a guy who has shown that he has value. Last year, Marte hit 9 home runs, a 745 OPS, 111 OPS plus, only 329 plate appearances, only 98 games played. But, he played his highest games last year since 2022. So, there was value towards keeping this man by the name of Starling Marte because of the fact that he brings that leadership quality. And you know what? Some people may say, what do you mean? Well, I mean, the cornerstone of the franchise, the cornerstone of the Mets franchise, Mr. Juan Soto said the biggest leader in that clubhouse is Starling Marte. So, I mean, that by itself is a very important aspect to consider. Very important aspect to consider. So, the Mets, instead of, kind of poo-pooing, shoving him away, he's 37 years old. I, in the past, probably would say, hey, you know what, Marte, he's done, this and that. But, we have to look beyond what the numbers were. And the numbers weren't that bad. If he's, a bench player, DHs every couple games here and there, I would say his role is a lot more than just that production. And again, in the past, I wouldn't have thought of the leadership like the JD Martinez. I wouldn't have thought of that. But now I'm thinking of that. And, I would really consider it. What, he was making $20 million a year. Nowhere near that. I mean, 1 year, probably $4 or $5 million in the role that we're going to have for him. But that's about it. That is about it. And again, it's learning from past mistakes. All right, last year we weren't aggressive with the pitchers. Now you'd be a little more aggressive acquiring an ace. And now you look into building that clubhouse a little better. Maybe it starts with keeping some of the leadership on the team and building around it. Doesn't mean, oh, you got your leader in Starling Marte. No, you want to build a clubhouse of leaders. So Starling Marte is a guy who has those qualities. And also maybe he can impart those qualities on some of the youngsters as well. And maybe some of those guys, they are, developing. The Mets are big on developing. And again, having a leader is good for development. Okay, again, learning from past mistakes. Now, another mistake the Mets made was, and this was a big one. You talk about defensive run saves, that has to do with pitching, but a big part of it has to do with defense. Now, we're not going to talk about it a lot, but let's just say the Pete Alonso equation. The Pete Alonso equation, the Pete Alonso conundrum, the Pete Alonso saga is going to exist for the next couple of weeks. I would say right now, it's October 27th. You got the World Series going on for, next week, probably a little less than that. Then you got the GM meetings, second week of November. Then you got winter meetings at the beginning of December. So, 4 weeks in November, I don't think you're going to see Pete Alonso signed. Now, if he signs early, I believe it's going to be sometime in December to mid-December. That's him signing early. Is he going to be one of those rare players that signs in November? I highly doubt it. So if he signs early, it will be from December 1st to December 15th in that time period. But again, learning from past mistakes, I love what Pete Alonso did last year offensively. 38 home runs, 126 RBIs, 41 doubles, 871 OPS, 272 average. These are all numbers off the top of my head. But again, they're ingrained in your head because, again, it's another historic Mets offensive season. But if you look at where it got us, did he win a couple games? Yes. Did he lose a couple games? Well, I mean, according to the defensive run saves, he was -9. So that kind of contributes to him not saving a lot of games, so not doing pretty well. So, and if you're going to focus on preventing runs like David Stearns is preaching, Pete Alonso is looking not likely, in my opinion. I'm not saying I don't want him. I'm kind of really on the fence right now because it really depends on, what we could do with the contract and what the rest of the team kind of looks like. So that's my stance. But just looking at what David Stearns is all about and what he wants to do and learning from past mistakes, well, you signed Pete last year. Where did it get you? 183 games. Not very good. How many games did he lose with the glove? Quite a few. Quite a few. How many gloves did he use, like not hitting the pitcher on the run? Quite a few. Quite a few. Okay. So again, Pete Alonso, what'd you learn from that? It depends who you're going to replace him with, but I like a guy like Cody Bellinger. And I know we're using Cody Bellinger because he is a name that we are very familiar with. He could play center, left, first base. He's a gold glove caliber defensive guy. He's a guy that, slots in very well on the Mets team. He really does in so many different ways. He does. I mean, let's just say in terms of saving some positions for the prospects to be ready, he could play center field the first half of the year. Tyrone Taylor backs him up. Carson Bench is ready at the around the trade deadline. Boom, dump, push him to first base. I mean, you could push him to first base. You could push him to left field after that. And with the benefit to that, now you can give Nimmo some rest. Now you have, an upgraded center, an upgraded left. Depending on what you do with Pete, maybe you have Mark Vientos at first because you don't sign Pete. Okay, now you can upgrade your defense by putting a guy like Bellinger at first, and he could be very, very good over there. His versatility is amazing, but he's not the only guy. He's not the only guy. So if Stearns, deems another guy that is similar to Bellinger, but cost you less in terms of dollars, then, Stearns has to, pursue that as well. And again, it's Stearns' job to get ultra creative, especially through the trade market. And I haven't seen it in the first 2 years in terms of acquiring talent, me stepping back and say, wow, that was a pretty good trade. That was a really good trade. I've stepped back many times and said, wow, the trade's gotten worse throughout the last couple of years. I mean, the biggest acquisition, we needed starting pitching in the worst way in 2024 at the deadline when Kodai Senga just went down. And I'm like, okay, thank God Kodai Senga went down before the trade deadline. And then you end up with Paul Blackburn as your big acquisition starter from the MLB. So we got to learn. So again, we had a similar thing happen in 2025. Kodai Senga, hurt his hamstring. And again, we knew now he re-injured himself. And again, that should have been something that we prepared for. But again, we didn't really go out and get an ace at the deadline. We didn't. As good as, some people say the deadline was, and, they look back and say, well, 99% of the experts said the deadline was good. We got Helsley, we got Mullins, we got Taylor Rogers, we got Gregory Soto, we got every top reliever that, was supposedly out there, obviously some of the top ones. And Stearns should be praised. Stearns should be praised for that. I disagree because I value a good general manager, a good president, as somebody who can see things that everybody else cannot. Somebody who doesn't think like the fans, who doesn't think like the prognosticators on TV, who aren't paid to be GMs, aren't paid to be presidents, who our people who do YouTube. We're not paid to run the teams. We all wish we were. We all wish we had that responsibility and that ability to make those decisions, but we're not. We're just not. So in actualities, did Stearns see things that everybody else did not? No, he didn't. He in fact, people outside of the Mets organization that I spoke to at the deadline time, I spoke to dozens and dozens of Giant fans in person and through, connections from here. And everybody, that I'm like, oh, we got Tyler Rogers, what a great pitcher. We gave it Drew Gilbert, Blake Tidwell, Jose Budo, and I'm like, okay, it's a steep package, but we got talent, and everybody's kind of laughing at that time. And same thing, Ryan Helsley, same thing with Mullins. Everybody that was really outside the Mets sphere gave me a different opinion that the Mets, gave up a decent amount of prospects. And at the end of the day, best case scenario, these guys were only here for a handful of games. You didn't get not even one player that was here was an asset past 2025. So again, Trades, another big thing, learning from past mistakes. Let's acquire some talent. If we are going to insert prospects, insert talent, whether it's low-level talent, mid-level talent, or elite talent. Now, the best thing the Mets did is they kept their elite prospects. That helped them out tremendously because as of August of 2025, that was 2 months ago, so not much has changed since then. A lot of publications rank the Mets farm system pretty highly. ESPN ranked the Mets farm system as the number one farm system in baseball. And, many people don't look to for ESPN for farm rankings, but MLB.com ranked the Mets as the number 7 farm system in all of baseball. So if you have a top end farm system ranked by multiple publications, you're doing a very good job, especially when you compare what the Mets' top 10 prospects were going into 2024, which is really comical. I just off the top of my head, Drew Gilbert was number 2. Luis Angel Acuna was the number 3 prospect. Blade Tidwell was the number 8 prospect. You had Mike Vassell as the number 11. You had Alex Ramirez as number 15. You had a lot of laughable, prospects in, rankings that, right now, obviously they wouldn't even be in the top 30. So that is one good thing that I want to give Stearns credit for improving and, holding on to the top prospects. Okay, so what are we going to do with center? What are we going to do with center? We went to Mullins. He's going to be entering free agency, but that was one of the biggest disasters of the Stearns regime. We didn't financially have to give him a lot of money, but again, we traded assets and we thought we had an upgrade. We thought we had an upgrade, but Mullins hit 2 home runs, slashed 182. 182. Couldn't even bat 200. 284 on base, 281 slug. He had 143 plate appearances with the New York Mets. His defense was mediocre at best. And I said, this many times in live shows and in videos. One of the best defensive alignments in all of Major League Baseball was when the Mets had Soto in right, Mullins in center, and Nimmo in left. Now, I know there are a lot of people came to the aid in the defense of Nimmo because if you look at his errors, he doesn't have a ridiculous amount of errors, but you really had to look at him play on a daily basis. If you watch the games, innings 1 through 9, the way he went after the baseball was not good. The way he went after the baseball, his routes that he took weren't direct. He went back on balls, and it looked not very professional. The way he went in on balls, he let balls bounce off his chest, go past him. The routes he took, like I said, weren't, very good. I don't know if he was dealing with lower leg injuries, but it looked like in a big way, he took a step back. In a big way, he took a step back, and he did make some big errors kind of when we needed him to not make those errors. And we all know Nimmo's arm has always been a noodle. So it's not like he has that strong arm to go with suspect defense. No, to go with bad defense, he has an even worse arm. Okay. So let's see. So Mullins, the 8-year veteran, people are saying, is that going to be an option? Hell no, it's not going to be an option. You thought even the speed was going to be a positive factor, but his speed didn't really help. Okay, so at minimum, how are the Mets going to approach the center field positioning? And if you listen to David Stearns, and again, we got to listen to David Stearns when we anticipate what the plan is going to be. He highlighted defensive runs saved. He also, put out there through a couple news sources that a guy like Carson Bench, most likely Jet Williams, but Carson Bench was the guy that I heard particularly because we're looking at the center field upgrade. He wouldn't be with the Mets until mid-2026 or maybe 2027 altogether. So that means the beginning of 2026, you're not going to have Bench make the opening day roster. Barring the guy goes nuts in spring training, barring that he goes nuts. But the Mets, what they want to do, and they've been pretty consistent on this, is they want sustained success at a particular level. So, at the AAA level, let's say 4, 5, 6 months of success down there, a year of success. then move them to the next level. They've done that very methodically with Sproat, very methodically with McLean, very methodical with some of these pitchers. Jonah Tong, not too methodically. They moved him to AAA, 2 starts, boom, MLB level. Kind of showed you where the Mets were desperate wise in terms of starting pitching. Their own fault. They went through 50 pitchers. And again, learning from past mistakes. How much talent are we going to acquire when we get our starters, when we get our bullpen together? I think we need, and I'm going to say this, we need at least 2 top-end starters. So if we traded it for a Skubal, I would also want another pickup, whether it's a Peralta, whether it's an Alcantara, whether, depending on where you want to look around the league, I need another top end guy. I need another top end guy. I'm going to talk about Peralta in a little bit. But I'm going to go back to our center field conversation because there are some options. There are some options. But what I was about to say is, since Stearns has already put it out there that Benj is going to be there, just not on opening day, you need a short-term solution. So some short-term solutions is you could go back to the well. You can go to Harrison Bader. And, I don't think that's a bad 1-year deal. I really don't, because I really like what Harrison Bader, he really brought a lot of energy to the table. I don't know if he would go back to the New York Mets. He kind of played the New York Mets like they wronged him in the worst way. So I don't know if he'd go back to the New York Mets. And the Phillies, that would be a guy I'd like to resign if I were them. Another short-term guy, maybe a guy like Trent Grisham, who had a pretty good year with the Yankees, at least offensively. Defensively, he took a step back. He used to be a guy like Gold Glove caliber guy, but he took a step back defensively. Offensively, he took a big step up. Obviously, we spoke about Cody Bellinger. He could fill the void there too, although he hasn't been a consistent center fielder since 2022. That's something to keep in mind. But again, Grisham and Bellinger, they both were from the Yankees, so that would be interesting scenarios right then and there. Another guy that we've spoken about in so many videos, but this guy's name is going to continue to pop up until he gets traded, and that's Luis Robert Jr. And, it's very, very interesting that the White Sox haven't traded him because, in my opinion, his value continues to trend downward. As you trade him, the time that he is under contract becomes less and less. So a time that he could potentially be on a person's team is not as much. So the value would go down. And it's not like, all right, the years have gone down, but his production has gone up. His production, now he's the Luis Robert Jr. of a couple years ago. No, he has consistently stayed very inconsistent and has struggled. So again, the White Sox, I'm not sure what they're looking for, what they're doing. They're going to have to pick up a $20 million option in order to trade him because their scenario is a disaster. They're a disaster over there. They're a disaster. And, you got to understand, if you are the White Sox, the value of Robert Jr. has gone down. And I remember at the deadline, I read an article saying the White Sox are not going to accept anything less for Robert Jr. other than what they think he could be. I'm like, what? So you're going to trade for a player that hasn't been that player for a couple years? It just made no sense. It really made no sense. Teams aren't going to, Chicago White Sox made a mistake not trading him when their value is high. They're not going to say, okay, you made a mistake, but we'll still give you that package as if his value was at an all-time high. Just not going to happen. The White Sox have to look themselves in the mirror. They made a mistake. Now, is a guy like David Stearns going to be your guy, that you can sucker? I don't think so. Other Mets GMs, presidents of the past, they might have been your guy. Maybe another franchise might be your guy. But if you want to deal with the Mets, you're going to have to deal more in reality. And a guy like Robert Jr., I think could, be a positive. It could be a positive because the $20 million isn't going to be an issue. It's not going to be an issue. So right then and there, a team that is, kind of reluctant because they're like, oh, you're paying $20 million and he hasn't been productive. Mets don't have to worry about that. $20 million is nothing. So again, that eliminates a lot of teams that are wary about the money and wary about the production. No, the Mets could sign him $20 million, aside, injury note aside. It doesn't really matter. Those risks production, injuries, they'll take a chance on that. At the end of the day, it's only 1 year option. They don't have to pick up the option after this year. Now, if, best case scenario, Robert Jr. has a resurgent year, the Mets could pick up the option, they could trade him, or they really like what he does. He's got that upside, a 30-30 elite defensive upside. Maybe they keep him. Maybe they keep him for another year. Maybe he becomes a center fielder or a left fielder. Maybe he becomes your left fielder. Maybe Benj is your center fielder or vice versa, whatever the Mets want to do. But he does improve your defense at the very least. He does improve your team speed. He does give you that elite dynamic weapon. And at the end of the day, and I think this is something for teams to consider, a team like the New York Mets. He was playing on the Chicago White Sox, one of the worst teams in the major leagues for the last couple years, right? If you're a superstar, that's got to take something out of you day in and day out, being on a loser. It really does. So now you put him and you insert him in a lineup with Juan Soto, Francisco Lindor, other up-and-coming players. I expect Brett Beatty to take it to another level. Mark Vientos, I expect if you, put him in as a first base DH set role, that's another thing. So improving the center field. That's, another thing I'm going to talk about in the future, getting some, you want defensive versatility, but I want some consistency out of the positions, whether it's the lineup or whether it's some of these guys, some of these guys not knowing where they're going to play on day in, day out. I'm not sure how productive that is. Okay, so that's where I like Luis Robert Jr. The money doesn't matter. If you can improve him, maybe he becomes a trade asset for you. And if you can get him right now, I think, right now he's coming off. His value should be at its lowest. His value should be at its lowest. And if the White Sox are willing to deal him for what his value truly is, okay, we can talk. Okay, so other options. And this is a one that I wanted to kind of put out there. And, you can comment on, obviously, you can comment on anything. You can comment on anything throughout this video. Comment whether you think Stearns is going to double down, Stearns is going to change, Stearns is going to adapt, what Stearns is going to do. But, I have to believe that David Stearns, a very smart man, he knows his boss isn't happy. He knows his boss isn't happy and is going to want to steer the ship in the right direction. So he knows what to do. Okay. So another guy that I've heard for probably the last couple years was BYRON BUXTON. Now, BYRON BUXTON, very interesting guy. He's been on the Minnesota Twins for 11 years. The Minnesota Twins did a major overhaul at the trade deadline, trading a lot of their talent away, not trading away Joe Ryan, not trading away BYRON BUXTON. BYRON BUXTON this year, I think, really put things together for the Twins. This is the year that they always believed, this is the type of production they always believed they can get out of him. He had a 5-WAR season, 35 home runs, 83 RBIs, 24 stolen bases, 264 batting average, 551 slug, 878 OPS, 136 OPS plus. He was an all-star. He's won a Gold Glove in his past. He's always been he's been a speedster. They always classified him as a 30-30 guy or potential guy. But, this year hitting those 30 home runs, that was his first time ever getting to that category. So, right now he's 31 years old, going to be 32 for next year, and he's signed for the next 3 years at a very reasonable price. He's signed for $15 million base price, and I think there's some incentive that can take it up by $10 million a year. But the base price for him is $15 million for 3 years. So that's very, 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 very reasonable for a guy that just produced a 5-WAR season and that has this type of ability. Now, this year, he had 488 at-bats. Last year, 355. The year before that, 304. The year before that, 340. The year before that, 235. The year before that was COVID. The year before that, 271, 90. So, he's been very, very often injured. That's been his big thing. And, this year, you see he got to 35 home runs. It was the first year he had over 400 at-bats since 2017. The first year. So that's scary in itself. So if you are the Twins, you're going to be looking to capitalize off of his monster year and him staying healthy. But if you're a team trying to acquire him, you have to keep that in mind that out of almost the last decade, he's only had 1 year over 400 at bats. So you have to keep that in perspective. But again, if you acquire him, you have that potential. You also have the fact that he signed for 3 years at a very reasonable price. And again, if you're the New York Mets, you are the type of team that could, you don't have to worry about the $45 million over 3 years. Although, I will say you have to be wary about compiling all these bad contracts that don't, that are going to be sitting on the sidelines. We already have guys sitting on the sidelines not producing for us. So that is something to be worried about. So it's an interesting option. It really is an interesting option. I think, that 3 years is, it's tough. It was 2 years, maybe, but, Stearns doesn't like anything long term. And, even though he does, this guy's a defender, this guy is in his low 30s. This is a tough call. I think Luis Robert Jr. would be a bit more appealing because it's a shorter contract. There's the opt out. You don't have to have him for more than 1 year. You can sign him for that second option season if you want to trade him, or if he's working well with the team. You're kind of more or less tied in for the 3 years if this determines to be a disaster. I mean, if he's injured, let's say he's injured in year 1, you have him for 3 years. He's just a dud on the bench. I don't know. I mean, at the very least, it looks like he's available for about 300 ABs a season, which it's. I just wouldn't give up a lot for him. That's what I'm trying to say. I just wouldn't give up a lot for him. I wouldn't give up a lot for Luis Robert Jr. I mean, these are all guys that have a lot of risk associated with them, a lot of risk. And I'm assuming the Minnesota Twins didn't ship him out because they're looking for the right trade package. And in the right trade package, they're probably looking for at least one top 5 prospect. One top 5 prospect. I would not be able to do that. I would not. And if you're the New York Mets, you want to allocate your prospects, allocate your resources in the right position. And a lot of my resources I want to allocate towards improving my weakest point, and that's my pitching. It seems like there's always a couple elite bats each offseason where we can choose to pay. But these arms are tough. These arms are a lot tougher, and the elite arms are ridiculously priced. They also carry the risk of you getting hurt. A pitcher gets hurt. What do? They do nothing unless they're Shohei Ohtani and they can hit 50 home runs. But there's only one Shohei Ohtani. So there's other trade options out there. We're not going to go through each of the details, but, you can look at, Jarren Duran. We heard that, although that's going to be a trickier situation with the Red Sox. Dalton Varsho, that's going to be a tricky situation with the Blue Jays. Miles Straw, Jake Myers, Alec Thomas, Jake McCarthy, Lars Nootbaar, Jake Magnum. So there are guys. There are guys out there. I just went over some of the top, more interesting options. Okay, so again, DH, it's going to depend on what the rest of the team looks like. Signing Pete Alonso affects your DH, what your DH position is going to be tremendously. I mean, if you sign a Pete and you have a third baseman, second baseman, then you could put Vientos at the DH position. But 2024, we had Martinez. Then we had a platoon with Marte and Jesse Winker, at least in the beginning of the season. If you want to stay with that alignment, you sign Pete Alonso. Do the Mets want to get a Kyle Schwarber? Do you want to go after an Ozuna? Do you want to, target those elite upgrades there? Those are options. Those are really options. And then the Mets can also look at upgrading a corner outfielder who could also DH. It's going to be very, very interesting. It's going to be very interesting. But at the end of the day, the theme of this video is learning from past mistakes. And let me see this. So I want to talk about one more situation. Okay, so Freddie Peralta, I'm hearing, we're seeing a lot of MLB writers and insiders linking the Mets to potentially Brewers ace Freddie Peralta, and that makes all the sense in the world. Obviously, the Mets need an ace. The Brewers, this is kind of how they do business. They trade away their guys who, at the end of their contracts, and try to get something for him. Try to get something for him. So it looks like in the case of Peralta, he has an $8 million option that the Brewers will exercise. And once they have him under team control, under that $8 million, then they could flip him for young pitchers, young prospects, that they have team control over for more than 1 year, obviously, and that are younger. So Peralta was a guy, great year this year. Awesome year, made the All-Star game. He's 29 years old, coming off his career best 270 ERA, made 33 starts. He had 204 strikeouts. He was a guy who could be considered an ace. He was the ace for the Milwaukee Brewers, a team who had a great season, a team who I had high expectations for. Freddie Peralta had a 5.5 wins above replacement. The thing is with him, and I'll tell you this, Freddie Peralta, I always thought he was a very good, solid pitcher. In my mind, from afar, I always considered him at best a number 2. So, in my thinking, I would still want to get that ace. If I got a Skubal and a Peralta, then I'd be happy. Then I'd be satisfied. McLean slots in at number 3. Those two guys at the top end of your rotation, they can be your veterans, your anchors, your guys who help the younger guys, develop. And again, they could stabilize this rotation in times of turmoil, which we saw in 2025. You need that at the top end. But again, if he's going to be the guy we trade for, it's going to be a little tough for me to take. It's going to be tough for me to take. And another thing that's a little tough is, again, this is his best year of his career that he's coming off of. So what a great time for Milwaukee to choose to trade him. 17-6, 2.70 ERA. Any year before that, he had 1 year in 2021 where he had a 3.7 wins above replacement, but then the highest wins above replacement that he's had in his career was 2.5. 2.5. He's always been a guy about a 3.70 ERA. A number 2, number 3 pitcher. That's what I thought of him. This year he stepped up in a big way. He stepped up and he was an ace this year. He was an ace. But throughout the course of his career, what I've learned with pitchers, we just saw it this past year with Manaea. Guys often tend to go to what they were for the majority of their career. Sometimes there's a turn in their career and they all of a sudden go this way. Zach Wheeler, was hurt early on and then, he just all of a sudden takes off. Yeah, that'll be the situation. But more often, guys will go back to the mean, back to what they have been for most of their career. So, that's why I would expect Freddie Peralta to always be a nice pitcher, but to be more of a 2, more of a number 3. Now it goes back to what the Mets would have to give up. What the Mets would have to give up. Now, they've been linked to Skubal. And you assume if the Mets did that trade, Detroit's going to want to get some combination of Jonah Tong, Sproat, Benj, Jet Williams, maybe 2 top 15 prospects on top of that. So if you did that and like I wanted, and then you get a Peralta after that, that means you'd probably want to involve either Tong or Sproat, whoever you didn't trade, and maybe another top 15 prospect and see if that gets it done. So that means you're giving up a top 5 prospect and one of top pitchers in MLB in terms of the minor leagues. So is that what you're willing to do? Now, here's the thing. If I don't get a Skubal, it feels like I'm less likely to want to do that trade, give up a Tong or a Sprout plus a top 15 prospect or a top 10. Like I said, you're getting a number 2, number 3. That's what he's been for more of his career. I know he traded for he was an ace. And you have him for 1 year. You have him for 1 year. So these are things you all have to consider. And it's just tough for me to go into the season with Peralta being the biggest pitching acquisition. Historically, I'm going to look to what he has been, and then I'm giving up a Tong plus. I see why the Brewers want to do it. You want to get younger. You want to get more years of control. You want to gain multiple assets. Makes all the sense in the world for why they would want to do it. But again, Peralta, it seemed like I would push that button more if I'm on all-in mode, or if I'm not giving up a Tong or a Sprout. If we can do the package another way. I want to use my philosophy is I want to use my top elite assets to acquire elite talent. Elite talent. So that's what I want to do. Now, I mean, Stearns has given us hope and he has said, hey, we want to have like an open door of pitching talent, meaning that, hey, every 6 months you're going to have 2 or 3, 4 or 5 pitchers available for the Mets to bring up. If that becomes a situation and we're a factory of developing pitchers, great. I mean, the Mets pitching farm, the farm system is doing pretty well. In terms of pitching development, we haven't had a situation where going into next year, we're going to have 4 top Mets young pitching prospects. You're going to have Sprout, you're going to have Tong, you're going to have McLean, and you're going to have Christian Scott. Those are 4 guys that can vie for the starting rotation. Now, I know all of those guys aren't probably not going to make it. Tong looks like he needs more time. But for the fact of the matter is that all those 4 guys have touched the major leagues. And all those 4 guys are young and they've shown promise. And we haven't had that in such a long time. Not to mention, Stearns talking about waves. We do have the next wave coming. You have Will Watson, Jack Wenninger, Jonathan Santucci. That would be the next wave coming. And that wave, they say on MLB.com, Will Watson's slated for 2027, Santucci 2027, Wenninger 2026. So those guys are right here too. Those guys are right here. Jonathan Pintero 2025. And Dylan Ross, he should be here as well. So the Mets have a lot of guys, Ryan Lambert, Zach Thornton. They're all guys in their pitching system. RJ Gordon, Douglas Orellana. I mean, and then you have guys down the road too, like the Peter Cusos and the Camden Lomans. The Mets are really developing waves of pitching. Now, how good, how successful these guys are going to be, that's yet to be seen. But the fact that they are developing talent and talent on the rise, on the way, that's what I'm excited about. That's what I like that I see David Stearns is doing. And again, everybody makes mistakes. It's a couple of weeks ago. It feels like forever since the Mets have played baseball. By the time 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night comes, I want to go to my phone. I want to see what's going on with the Mets. I wish there was games. That's just my gut reflex. But obviously, the Dodgers are playing for the World Series. That has to end. And then we have the offseason. And then we could look forward to the team in 2026. And I'm just hoping, and I believe it's got to be, we're going to be pleasantly surprised. I really do. I really do. At this point, I think we're going to be pleasantly surprised. Me taking a step back, me not being as reactionary, because we still have the resources. We still have the money. It looks like we have the prospects. And now we're going to get some different talent on the bench, different coaches on the bench, different thought process on the bench. We're going to have tweak the leadership in that clubhouse. We're going to improve our defense, and we're going to get elite pitching talent or better pitching talent. The fact that our holes were just so obvious. That's the good thing too. It's not like, the Mets won 92 games or 88 games, and we have to really look deep down, and we have to make really tough decisions. I mean, it's just some things are just blatantly obvious, like Pete Alonso not playing first base. I mean, he was just really bad defensively at first base. He did do the scoops. I know that. A lot of our pitchers were just bad. Sanga, just bad. Manaea, most of the time, just bad. Second half of the year, a couple guys struggled. Peterson struggled. Tyler McGill, he's a guy that, I'm just hoping, I've always said he's got talent. It's just that, injuries this year and in last year, some inconsistencies and mental issues, not mental problems, but, just unfocused. So we're going to have to see. We're going to have to see, and I'm excited. I'm just excited that we're going to have a lot of the young kids, and that talent, even though you don't have everybody playing at once, they could be used in trades. So we have the ability to acquire talent where we need to as well. So folks, let me know what you think. Remember, like the video, subscribe. I will speak to everybody very, very soon.